So as I stated at the beginning of all this, these are two that I pretty much just wanted to do together in one video real quick, since it's two movies, two relatively big movies that came out in the same year, both of which she's fairly highly credited in, for this only pretty much being the follow-up year to The Devil Wears Prada, just to show how much that movie really made her take off. But yeah, between the two, it's about 3.5 minutes of screen time, if that. But as I said, we might as well just talk about the movies as a whole. So I actually want to start with Dan in Real Life, where it's co-written and directed by Peter Hedges, the father of Lucas Hedges, whose name seems to be slowly getting bigger than his father's as time goes on. But the thing about Peter Hedges is he is sort of criminally overlooked in regards to just how much he's done, because he wrote What's Eating Gilbert Grape, and I think he worked on the adaptation for About a Boy, and he also did a movie called Pieces of April with Katie Holmes and Patricia Clarkson, which got Clarkson an Oscar nomination. And the thing about this is that if you look at those movies and that work, which are just a few, you'll see that this is a dude that has, just right in the open, right on the table, this really incredible, empathy and understanding and, appreciation for just people in general, particularly families, and the sort of, struggle, everyday struggles that they go through, and the just coming together, and he just has such a grasp on that, it's this real sort of, area that he just owns, just, really off the radar. And dealing with, these struggles that, pretty much everybody can sort of identify with and understand, depending on where they come from. And that absolutely just totally, it almost seems like it comes to a head in this movie. This movie is sort of the ultimate crowning moment of him sort of working to that. And the thing here is that it's got Steve Carell, 2 years after Little Miss Sunshine. Obviously, the sort of running joke that he has with, his fellow comedians now is that he's gone from the, the Michael Scott era and all these over-the-top comedies, like Anchorman and all that, to being, almost solely this, really serious, dramatic actor. And you sort of see that transition when you look at, Little Miss Sunshine, and particularly this movie also. Because his task here is that he's playing this dude that's really just trying to get by. That's really the only thing he can do at this point, where he's got his daughters, but his wife has died. And this could have been, one of those really sort of generic sort of, sulking performances, where there's just sort of a blankness there that they have to sort of break out of. But the great thing about the casting of Carell is that the way he's able to be, he's obviously got to be, the stern dad and all that, but he's also living with this tragedy inside him. And so he's got to be, the awkward, ill-equipped dad. There's got to be something tragic to him, but there's also something funny he's able to bring to. And the fact that he can do all these things sometimes at the same time is crazy and amazing, and really brings the movie to life. And so when we see him as just this sort of depressed dude just trying to get through life, he eventually is going to meet Julia Binoche at this bookstore. And we end up knowing where that goes. Kind of a weird thing if you're familiar with Julia Binoche's filmography. It's if you've seen Damage with Jeremy Irons. It's she has this weird knack for keeping her relationships in the family. And coming in between, very close family members. But I guess that's a forte that she has. And it's kind of an odd role, too, for, this very renowned, respected Oscar winner to sort of work her way into, to be the love interest of both Steve Carell and Dane Cook in a comedy drama in 2007. But weirdly, she manages to make herself sort of fit right in. Obviously, she's a bit on the outskirts because she's just been introduced to the family through Dane Cook's character Mitch, but still, the magic with her really starts in this bookstore scene with Steve Carell, where it's when we see him and we know, we've got an idea of what his backstory is and where he's coming from, but then we immediately get a glimpse of the person that he probably once was before his tragedy when he meets her. Like, it's almost instantaneous, really. And we sort of see him, like, possessed by the chance, like seeing the chance in front of him and taking it. Um, and being able to, and we sort of, like, already feel for him in this way because we're seeing a guy that's so desperately trying to move on with his life, as opposed to just sort of being that character that has no intention but staying in the same place and has to be worked out of it. He's, like, immediately taking that chance himself, but obviously there's going to be multiple obstacles later they didn't even know about yet, but there's this moment towards, like, when they get to the cash register, and he's been pretending that he's somebody that works here, and it's revealed that he's not to her. And just the way we see him, like, in this moment where he's caught, and he, like, reverts back into his awkwardness, because he's found a way to be super smooth when he, like, takes that chance, but then we see sort of that awkward side to him just come right back when he finds himself in an awkward place he can't quite get out of. Which just really, just immediately gives this humanity to the character that he's going to carry throughout the whole thing. And to get a glimpse of that so early is like this. It's a really good thing to have, because you tend to kind of have to wait for characters to unravel. But the thing is this movie still has plenty of ways in which he can unravel, but you also don't feel like you're waiting for it because he has to go in so many different directions from the get go. So that's followed up with this scene that's brilliantly done, where we get him and Minosh basically talking the whole afternoon and getting to know each other. And this could have been bombarded with, like, exposition and emotional monologues and all that. But we see it from a distance, but we don't hear anything because there's, like, music playing over it, and it's based solely on, like, the body language, basically, and how there's not much, like, they just completely avoid the exposition thing because we pretty much are able to put it together easily ourselves already, which a lot of movies like this tend to not trust us to do. But thankfully Hedges is a very, like I say, really seems to understand people on so many different levels, not just in a way that he can observe them and then portray them as such, but also trusting them in how they view his movie. He obviously made those choices that really just make it much more easier, like it's opening up to the viewer in this way that's not too blatant, which is really nice. And the fact that obviously we're dealing with him and the death of his wife and all that, so you've got this really heavy material going in, but the way also you're doing it from this distance where you don't quite hear the exact words he's saying to her, we just watch their body language, sort of keeps the heavy material from not, like, it prevents it from bogging down, like, the sort of light approach that it's still taking to it, where it doesn't feel like we're going way too into that heavy territory. It can still keep its tone, but still have that stuff in there and not really lose that, which is really great. And then, obviously, like I said, we're going to pretty much see him still work with all this, especially with the revelations that come to him very quickly throughout the duration of the movie. And there's a couple of particular scenes, sometimes scenes that can say the same thing, but doing, like, the total opposite, interestingly, because we've got this one scene when he's in the hallway, and, like, everybody's in there, and it's sort of to show, like, this sort of distance and loneliness that he still feels, even when he's surrounded by family. When they're all packed into this hallway, and then they pretty much all just go to bed at the exact same time, and the doors close at the exact same time, and it went from, you know, family and pandemonium and all this to just absolute silence and loneliness within, like, seconds. And just how he's practically stranded there. And then there is a scene that's, like, the total opposite of this, but once again kind of gives you the same feel, where he's just, even though there is a distance, he's also incredibly overwhelmed by his family at the same time. So we have this scene when he learns that he's being set up with Blunt's character, and he's in the laundry room. And it's the opposite, where this is now a packed room, where nobody's going to leave, and people just keep coming in. Yet there's still sort of that, I mean, obviously it's mainly this whole, it's sort of like, almost like a screwball comedy type scene, something you would see, like, in the 40s or something. And sort of like those Marx Brothers scenes where people would just find ways to pack more and more people into one room. But there's still something that sort of rings through about his character in this particular moment where it's, you get what I mean. So that obviously brings us to this thing with Binoche kind of continuing, but it's in the presence of everybody that's under the impression that they have just met, and she's been with Dane Cook for however long now. And so this is where there's sort of a tricky thing about it, because this is a movie that could be seen as having, like, some questionable characters that make some really questionable choices, and how we as an audience are supposed to take that. And it's like, if Hedges didn't have such a grasp on just the humanity coming through, we'd probably have a huge problem in how these characters are seen. Like, especially when we get the different points of view, like when we're watching Carell get basically upset and lovesick watching her with Mitch, his brother, and he just kind of he has no choice but to basically watch this, and it's torturing him inside. But then there's a later scene where we realize the same thing is happening to Binoche, where she's watching him, like, leave with the kids and all that, and there's sort of that longing for him also. And sometimes it can get, like, almost seems like maybe Dan in particular is being a bit too intrusive, like when he confronts her in the bathroom and stuff like that. But there's this sort of believability in the way that she establishes that she thinks it's no big deal, really. That they just had, like, a nice day together and there was something like that, but obviously things are what they are. But we obviously know just by watching them, without anything sort of blatantly in our face, where this is going between them. I mean, sure, you could say, like, if you've seen enough sort of these, like, it could almost seem like, on the surface, like a sitcom level sort of story, where once you know the setup, you've seen enough things in the past that you can just pinpoint where things are going to go. But the fact that we learn all these emotions that they have through just watching them most of the time is what really makes it something above that. But speaking of that, and speaking of this sort of, these formulas that we know, obviously the Blunt character has to work her way into this, and basically, I really wish she had more to do and had more screen time, but it's, for the most part, her job here is to basically be the cliche of, you've got to, because there is a sort of a guilty conscience for everybody, including the audience, to sort of want Dan to end up with her, despite the fact that she's with Mitch, his brother. So you've got this, you have to introduce another character to make the audience feel less guilty, and make the characters feel less guilty about it. This sort of potential for, obviously they're going to set up its potential for Dan, but we all know its potential for Mitch. But once again, the way Hedges takes these seemingly obvious formulaic directions, it's the way that he introduces them. Because obviously, we get an idea where this is probably going to go, and how these characters, which directions they're going to go towards which other characters. But there are these little moments in there, like I said, just the way, you know, Dan and Juliette Binoche's character catch each other's eye every now and then, but then there's also the moment when Ruthie walks into the room, and it's the obvious reveal of Ruthie's story here is she's basically Tamara Drew, where she had like the pig nose, and now she's had the plastic surgery, and she looks like Blunt after she was built. She is so built up, because they've got the whole scene I was talking about in the laundry room where they're talking about her being, you know, pig-faced Draper, and then after that they sing a whole song about her being a pig-face, this whole improvised thing. And then obviously the big payoff is that Emily Blunt walks into the room, completely killing all of those expectations. So the thing here, though, is that, and obviously what she has to do here in this very small amount of, criminally small amount of screen time, is that she's obviously, she looks like Emily Blunt, but she's still kind of like, that past dork that she once was still kind of lingers in this scene. And it's kind of a character that's a bit hard to read, especially with the direction that we pretty much know where this is going. The thing I was going to get to was one of those little moments like we see with Dan and Juliette Binoche. There's one when Ruthie first walks into the room and we first see what she really looks like for the first time. And there's like a really brief cut to Mitch reacting to her. And you kind of get a sense of just the way he looks at her is sort of planting that seed already. Like I said, the way he does it that way instead of more blatantly, regardless of how cliche it might seem, is really what counts here, and that definitely works. But yeah, so the character, it can be a bit hard to read, and I don't think that's necessarily. We all know it's not because Blunt failed in some way, but it's sort of like the scene almost feels a bit too rushed. Like maybe it's too short. Because the little glimpses of her that we get, because like I said, there is like that dorkiness in her that's still kind of lingering, but then we get these moments like when she's talking about a guy that was in her life that like died after she knew him for 3 days, and she starts to like weep. But even though she like full on weeps, it's like really brief, and then she comes right out of it really quickly, almost like she's faking or something. And there's even time for Binoche to look around the table, like, is she serious while she's doing it? Like she doesn't buy it at all. Um, and then that's almost it. And then we get the dancing scene, which pretty much just eventually turns into a spotlight for Carell to do his hilarious thing. And then that's pretty much it for Ruthie. I think the next time she has lines is during the end credits, and you have to listen really closely, where like the camera goes by her and she says something like she's almost falling out of her dress or something, and that's it. After that, she's just sort of this revenge device that Mitch uses, where he says, "Well, I'm gonna go out with her and all that," and then that's kind of really where the movie could get a little. You're not really sure, because it's like, if Mitch and Ruthie end up together the way it seems to imply, it's like this really seems to start with I'm gonna do this to get back at Dan and Juliette Binoche kind of thing, and then there's the whole thing of when Dan and Juliette Binoche get together. There's we're not quite certain if this is the right thing or not, but another thing that he does really well in the writing process is this side plot going on with Britt Robertson as one of the daughters and her boyfriend, and the way that Dan has to be that, stern, uncool dad by not letting that happen, and how it's like, oh, you barely know him. The teenage girl thing, you barely know each other, but you're supposedly in love thing. And then when Dan comes to this huge conclusion, oh shit, that's me right now. And the way that they took that whole, because through the whole movie, we come back to this Britt Robertson thing every now and then, and it's sort of like, why are they pushing this cliche teenage girl love thing on us? It's like, besides to show that she thinks he's an annoying dad. And then it just makes perfect sense when it comes full circle, and he's talking to them, and he realizes that everything he's saying about their relationship he could say about himself and his feelings towards her, and it's like, is it real or is it just this thing or whatever? And that's a really nice way to not only just bring it full circle, but to show the connection to the family members themselves is much closer than they realize. And I do think, though, one of the things that sort of stands out in a weird way, that sort of makes things feel maybe not quite as happy as they could when we reach a conclusion, is I feel like the movie is oddly cold to Mitch for the most part. Because they do have these moments where they kind of have these nice ways of playing with the concept a little bit, like the scene where they sing the duet and he's singing about her, and obviously things are slowly coming to light, at least a little bit, even though they mostly remain blind to it, even though it's like staring them right in the face. But still, like I said, the way that they sort of just seem to abandon him when we go into even when everything is revealed, we know that he's pissed off, we know that he's, feeling resentment, and for good reason, but it's like, I mean, yeah, it's kind of hard to, feel sorry for him if he's going to end up with Emily Blunt by the end of this, so it's like that's what I'm saying, though, is her character's basically used to make this okay, and so that does feel a bit like there could be a bit more to it, but it seems almost like it's in almost maybe too much of a hurry. But yeah, but they still do some interesting things in regards to showing, like, how Binoche comes to that conclusion that she feels more for Dan than she does for Mitch. Like, the whole idea that it was really probably Dan that she was falling for the whole time, when she learns that all the things that Mitch said that made her feel something for him were just Dan's words that he was using. So it's like, even before she knew Dan, she was falling for him, which is this really sort of interesting wrench in that whole thing. So But yeah, even so, I do think we could have maybe given Mitch a bit more closure and a bit more of a sort of one-on-one scene that, I mean, obviously we get this to an extent, but something that sort of really, like, we could have tied it up probably a little cleaner. But at the end there, it's like really quick to end, so I feel like they probably could have done more with that. But um, so yeah, but for the most part, though, like I said, Hedges is just this really underrated writer and director when it comes to, or overlooked writer and director when it comes to just creating these people that just feel really real and really, getting that atmosphere that feels like it really pulls you into the families that you meet in his movies and just really, you know, yeah, just really puts you there. And like I said, in many cases, probably could feel a bit sitcom-like, but he definitely finds a way of sort of bringing a reality to it, especially with casting too, like John Mahoney and Diane Weiss playing the parents and all that. Just sort of instantly bring something to it. So yeah, all in all, it's obviously this. It's a very feel good movie about characters that are super depressed and super resentful and are hiding things from each other they really shouldn't be and making decisions that may or may not be the right thing, yet somehow still manages to come through in this really positive way. And when it does get to the ending, even if it does feel like things are maybe a two-bit open in some cases, it's it all comes together nicely and does make for a really great movie for this sort of genre. So that's basically how I feel about that. As far as Charlie Wilson's War goes, obviously, as I said before, this isn't exactly the first time I talked about this, because we also talked about it when we did the Philip Seymour Hoffman tribute, where we just sort of talked about his performance and then moved on. It's not only that, but it's also ended up being Mike Nichols' last movie, which probably not many people would have realized back in 2007, as it happened feels like much later. And it's also written by Aaron Sorkin, so you've got all these things with you've got obviously Mike Nichols and Sorkin. And the thing about this is that Nichols had just come off of Closer, which was this adaptation of a play and all that, and you've got Sorkin, who is obviously really broken out as a screenwriter in movies in particular, but is mainly known, for a while there was mainly known for his TV work and plays like A Few Good Men and stuff like that. So these two together seem like kind of a perfect fit at just the right time. And then you throw this cast on it and the story itself, and you've got something. I remember being super hyped for this when it was coming out at the time. And obviously I have... well, the thing about this movie, though, is that it is something where it is definitely a good movie overall, but it's really certain aspects of it by themselves that really, set it on fire and really bring it to life. Because you may have some criticisms here and there, like, obviously one of the best things that could probably happen to a movie is that Tom Hanks be the star of it. But I remember there were some people that thought that maybe he was a bit miscast or a bit of an odd casting choice. And yeah, when you look at the character on the outside, I can kind of get why people would say that. But he obviously is still able to really do, like, he brings the character to life, but because I've heard also some complaints, it's weird to me that there are actually some people that exist that don't like Tom Hanks and think that he's sort of the same thing every time. But in a way, I could see this sort of being a break off of that, should somebody think that, because you do have scenes where he's able to, like, play it totally straight. One of the scenes that really stands out is the scene where he's talking to Amy Adams on the plane and talking about basically how he got into politics and when he fell in love with America, when he's talking about how the time that he got people to vote basically just to get revenge on the guy that killed his dog. And scenes like that really give sort of a center to the character that on the outskirts is more of like a comedic character for a lot of the time, but can do that bouncing around, because if there's one thing Tom Hanks is really known for, it's how well he can do both comedy and drama, and roles like this that make him have to bring those together. Because not only is that really important, but it also in regards to the tone of the movie itself. Because when it starts, obviously you've got, your Sorkin dialogue flying around, and you've got, these funny lines here and there, and the way he just sort of breezes through and, like, does the drugs and goes through all these different scenarios. The girl in the hot tub that desperately wants to do that show or soap opera or whatever. And there's sort of like this upbeat sort of comedic vibe to it, like you're watching a comedy. Um, but then you would think when it gets to the heavier material that we might run into a problem here if this is how we start. But that's the thing is when you get there, when you get to the scenes, like when he goes over there and he like visits and he's looking out and he's like hearing the stories of like the bombs going off and all that and the attacks and all that. And the attack scene itself is really kind of the transition of that with the helicopters flying over and all that. Not only sets up the direction the whole movie is going, but sort of mixes the genre up a little bit also, but in a way that feels like a smooth transition and not just this abrupt sudden change. Which is really important. And that, like I said, that really does come back, though, to Hanks' performance also, the way he's able to balance some of the more comedic scenes, particularly the Hoffman scenes. But then also the scenes, like, when he's, like, towards the end, when he's, like, got that melancholic loneliness, when he's talking to Julia Roberts when she's next to her husband, her new husband. And the way he's able to do both scenes like that and bounce around from one to the other. Even when it's not necessarily transitioning all the way, the fact that he's able to go back and forth really helps a lot in establishing the tone also. It also might be kind of hard for some people to buy, like, no offense to him by any means, but it might be hard for some people to buy the whole Tom Hanks playing fuck everything that moves kind of guy. He doesn't quite have that vibe to him, but I do think it helps. Once again, no offense to him whatsoever, but it does seem like, in the case of Charlie Wilson's sex life, a lot of it in the movie is played for comedic effect, which I think helps a lot in that scenario. So yeah, I don't see him as like sort of a weird casting choice or a miscast thing at all. So, and then very early on, we do meet Blunt's character. And it would not surprise anybody to know after they've seen the movie that it's my understanding she worked on it for 2 days. I'm assuming the first day was the scene in his office and the second scene was the scene in his apartment. Or the second day was the scene in his apartment. And so what she's tasked with here in this very, very small screen time, probably even smaller than the screen time in in real life, it starts off with her and her dad there, and her dad is basically there to talk to him about the whole nativity scene and where they're going to do it, if they're going to have to move it or whatever. And it's like the scene is actively trying to ignore her. How, like, the camera is always finding ways to, like, land on her and then move to something else as quick as possible, whether it be Amy Adams pacing around, or him talking to her dad, or him and her dad in the office or whatever. But yet, there's still something about her presence that just immediately draws your attention to her. Like, when she is first there, she's sort of got like that button down look, like she's sort of got that uptight vibe to her. But then there's the moment when they say they're talking about the girls that work for Charlie and the whole you can teach them to type, but you can't teach them to grow tits. And when she says that, when the woman says that, you see Blunt like slightly smirk, and you kind of get the idea of where this character might be going. Like, it's not, once we see that one small tiny smirk, it's not at all a surprise to us when the scene cuts and suddenly she's scantily clad in his apartment wearing his shirt. So, and then in the way she also does that, like that sort of, like that stifled smile also. And then we've got the and then, once again, that's pretty much it. Then she's basically there to be scantily clad and make us envious of Tom Hanks. But the thing here is that, number one, it does feel like we're getting a bit blue-balled in the sense that this is Emily Blunt in a movie that's scripted by Aaron Sorkin. And nowadays you think, once again, she was just fresh off the Devil Wears Prada, but even then it's like, Sorkin sort of has that style, especially when you see stuff like The West Wing or something, where it's people walking and talking, and how that's kind of his style, and it's like, you already get a sense that she could totally pull that off when you see her in The Devil Wears Prada, but then it's just like, I would just love to see her, like, own a Sorkin script. I would love to see her get something like Chastain's part in Molly's Game or something, to see her work with something like that, because I feel like she would just completely destroy it, and I mean that in the good sense. But and then also you maybe think, well, maybe she should have gotten a bigger part. But then it's like you first think give her the Amy Adams part, but then it's like, well, then she probably would have been playing assistants for the rest of her life. So maybe that was for the better. But yeah. So like I said, mainly I would just really this give us like the tiniest glimpse of her working with Sorkin dialogue, but it doesn't feel like the signature Sorkin dialogue, which I would just. I said I feel like it's just a tease more than anything else, and then she disappears from the movie entirely. I spent more time talking about her just now than the time she's in the movie, and that's it. But once her scene ends, that immediately takes us into the fire that brings this movie to life, and that is Philip Seymour Hoffman's performance, particularly the scene with John Slattery. And the thing about this is, like I said, really just any time him and Hanks are on screen together is where the movie's really alive. But they're so alive, it doesn't feel like I'm not saying the movie's like suffering without them, but it's definitely when it's reaching its peaks. So we've got, like I said, the scenes with him and John Slattery, which apparently made enough of an impact that when John Slattery would go on to direct a movie, God's Pocket, but Hoffman was the star of it, of course. But then you also have these scenes where like one of, probably my favorite scene in the movie, apart from the John Slattery scene, is the scene when they're in the office and they have to. Amy Adams keeps coming in, and then Hoffman has to leave, and they keep interchanging. But then we learn the bottle's bugged, and he knows what's going on, and they're trying to work out these different problems simultaneously with Blunt's dad, and then what Hoffman's talking to him about. Introduces himself by one of the most memorable names in movie history, Gus Avocados. And then just going through these back and forth issues, but that's also not to undermine the rest of the supporting cast we've got here. Puri comes in as the president, but it also makes you notice with Puri, Mike Nichols, and Phil Seymour Hoffman how many people in this movie are no longer here and how much of a blow that is. And it's weirdly surrounding this movie, but you've also got Christopher Denham has a nice small part as the chess player, and that sort of back and forth scene is also very sort of Sorkin-esque. Also with the, I guess it wouldn't be Sorkin-esque if it's actually him, but when like obviously they Gus and Charlie have been a bit confrontational at their start here, but then we have this next scene with Christopher Denham when he like calls out his military rank or whatever. And just the way Hoffman says, like, what the fuck? He said he was sorry. And it's like he's immediately jumping to his defense now. And just watching their relationship sort of build throughout and take those different directions like that is really great. But then we've also got, like, Ned Beatty comes in, Dennis O'Hare comes in and out of it. All these great actors that you've seen in all these big parts before just sort of coming in and out, with obviously Blunt included. Just really enriches it throughout. But like I said, there's just nothing like those Hoffman scenes, especially with him and Hanks together. And in true sort of Sorkin fashion, on top of these great actors delivering it and Nichols' approach to it, we've got these scenes that might seem like they would be mundane in any other movie. Like we've got a whole bunch of... Because the thing is that it seems like it would be a very simple story up front. Because it's like, they're being attacked, they need weapons to take the helicopters down, and we need to get them those weapons. That's all it is. But then we've got all like the deal making and the meetings and all that, and just showing us like the full complicated process it takes to do something like that. And not even just that, but even the small things, like the whole nativity scene should not be as complicated as it is, but apparently it is. And takes all these different ins and outs and all these different meetings to do even something that small, let alone, you know, give people weapons to shoot down helicopters and stuff like that. But obviously in true Sorkin fashion, it's this in this really like entertaining and rapid fire way. And the thing about also is I say that he's basically, for a while there he was known for strictly like TV and plays, but it's like there's still something that's so great about seeing this dialogue in something that's relatively cinematic. But at the same time, even though it does feel cinematic, it's so rapid fire and so entertaining. It takes like an hour 40 something and manages to make it feel like it's the length of an episode of TV, like one episode of TV. So that's always, the fact that it just sort of blows by is something I've always loved. If there's one thing that kind of stands out in a sort of like maybe being underwhelming, I guess it would be the presence of Julia Roberts. Because you see her, you know, in between Hanks and Philip Seymour Hoffman, and you think this must be a really juicy part, and you see she's got like the hair and the voice and all that, and just the sort of character she plays, but she just feels really. I mean, obviously, she's obviously certain links in the chains here, but I mean, overall, given what it feels like the role could have been, especially with her in it, it's weird how inconsequential she feels in the whole once it's all said and done. So I feel like that could have been a lot more juicy than it is, and it already does kind of have that sense of being like a nice juicy role for an actress and all that. But it's still like, yes, I feel like she should have much more of a presence than she does. But I guess that's the way it is. But and of course the sort of funny thing when they have the screening at her place for that movie she's put together, and when he asks exactly what it is, her response is, well, I'm not submitting it for Golden Globes. Well, wouldn't you know, this movie got 5 Golden Globe nominations. I don't know if that's a coincidence or not, but there it is. So yes, so with this being the blunt series that I'm doing, what I'm really trying to say here is that it's really incredible what I was talking about a little bit ago, where it's like, obviously My Summer of Love had come out, and it was this really sort of small, sort of, obviously, you know, being in a different country entirely, it wasn't going to quite have that following yet here. It didn't really find it, like, in mass until later. So really, the thing that really made her break out was The Devil Wears Prada, and this is one part with one movie. And then her next projects, she's listed alongside, like when you look at Charlie Wilson's War, you've got Tom Hanks, you've got Julia Roberts, you've got Philip Seymour Hoffman, and then if you look at the credits, it's Amy Adams, Ned Beatty, and then her. And it's like, for only really being known for The Devil Wears Prada at the time, that's really fucking high and in really big company for somebody that people are only just getting to know. And then the same thing for her name is on the back of Dan in Real Life. She's after John Mahoney, who is right after Dane Cook. And so it's like, just to see, just looking at these two and seeing her placement and comparing it with her screen time just shows you how much she was able to, on basically talent alone, just explode overnight and just be this name that everybody wanted. I think even Peter Hedges said, despite the lack of screen time in Dan in Real Life, he was absolutely, positively, like, driven to have her on screen as much as he possibly could, without them, like, really taking the script in a different direction. So yeah, this is basically, she can say so incredibly much with so little. So that's the point I'm trying to make. So the next video, which is probably going to go up right about with this one because I'm running late, is the Versus. So, which is going to be one movie with her and one movie not with her, but still the same thing. So until that's it for this.